Hey everybody, welcome back to Reason and Theology. It's been a few days since I've done a show, which is unusual for me. I tend to do a show 7 days a week, sometimes multiple times a day. And so it's been a little while. Basically, long story short, as I recently expressed to my patrons, what happened was I was working on a project and I was using some drywall screws that notoriously flake metal shavings. And I always get them stuck in my finger all the time, but it's kind of like a splinter, so it's no big deal. But evidently, one of those shavings just got left on my hand somehow, and I rubbed my eye and got one of those metal pieces stuck in my right eye, and it caused a lot of issues, scratching around my eyeball and all kinds of wild stuff. So it was pretty difficult. I couldn't see for basically about 2.5 days because anytime I would open my eye, it would become even more aggravated and I would have to blink a lot, and that would perpetuate it and actually make it worse, exacerbate it. Because the more I blinked, the more I felt it and the more it caused me to blink. And so I basically was not functional for several days. I'll spare you of the gory details, but we were able to get the piece out, and took a few more days for it to just kind of heal and for the redness to go away. So here we are. All right. That's why I've been gone for a little while though, but I'm glad to be back, and I can certainly tell you that when you lose your vision like that, um it really becomes debilitating. There's just not a whole lot that you could do. So I can certainly say after this experience, I'm really grateful for vision, the gift of vision. So let's all thank God for that. Um, yeah, anyways, well, let's get back to it. I want to talk about the Synod on Synodality. It's that time again of the year. Synod is cranking up again, so you're going to be seeing this a lot in the news. We've spoken about it before. There's been, multiple synods that have happened, and the current one that is going on is actually a continuation of last year. So it's kind of the to be continued version, the part two of what was going on last year. And it's about that time of the year where we're cranking up, getting ready for the Synod again. So you're going to be seeing a lot of people talking about it. So I thought, okay, this would be a good opportunity for us to just kind of review again what exactly a synod is, kind of go over the basics, what it is, what it isn't, and what the purpose of this current synod is, as well as some potential criticisms that I have of the synod of bishops, and the at least practical criticisms of what's going on with it. And then after we explore that, I do want to talk about a few other odds and ends, a few other topics that are coming up in the news. So we'll discuss those as well. But before we dive into the question on the Synod, I want to remind y'all, hit that subscribe button. If you have benefited from Reason and Theology before, or currently are benefiting from it, please go ahead and do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. It will help me reach more people with the content on this channel. And of course, hit the like button while you're at it. So let me share my screen and let's take a brief look at what the Synod is, just to kind of recap some of this. For those of y'all who are new to this channel, y'all may not have seen this, but those of y'all who have been a while, y'all have probably seen me go over some of this, but we got a lot of new people watching. So let's maybe review some of this stuff together. This is from the Code of Canon Law that explains what the Synod of Bishops is. So it notes in Canon 342, the Synod of Bishops is a group of bishops who have been chosen from different regions of the world, and they meet together at fixed times to foster closer unity between the Pope and the bishops. They also assist the the Pope with their council. So it's an advisory body is what it is. They assist the Pope with their counsel in the preservation and growth of faith and morals, and in the observance and strengthening of ecclesiastical discipline, and also to consider questions pertaining to the activity of the church in the world. So usually there's some kind of topic that the Pope wants to consider, some topic that he wants advice on, and they'll come together and they'll discuss it, and they will offer him some kind of counsel, some kind of advice. And of course, he's free to take it or leave it, right? I mean, it's just an advisory body. And with this particular synod, it's a synod on synodality. So, what are they talking about? They're talking about synodality itself. So people say, well, that makes no sense. How can you have a synod on synodality? Well, it's kind of like saying, well, how can the Bible talk about the Bible? How can Scripture talk about Scripture? I mean, it's a fact that it can and it does. And so synods can talk about what synodality is and how it impacts people. So really, it makes sense as far as a topic is concerned. And the question is kind of, okay, how can we be more synodal in practice all around? Synodality, I mean, historically is a little bit different than how it's being defined here today. But effectively, it means coming together and dialoguing and discussing. That's effectively what it means right now. Slightly different than perhaps what it would have meant in some contexts throughout church history, where it might be a little bit more defined than just merely dialoguing. It might refer to an actual council, a church council, rather than just an advisory body, an actual council that teaches and governs the church. So it's a little bit different than how it has been understood historically. And of course, this is not to replace councils or anything like that. This is something that is alongside of them. Okay, so Canon 343, it is for the Synod of Bishops to discuss the questions for consideration and express its wishes, but not to resolve them. Why? Because an advisory body does not have the authority to resolve these issues. It can't teach authoritatively. In other words, it's not magisterial. There could be some exceptions where the Pope could endow it with magisterial authority, and thereby they would kind of act as an agent of the Pope and his magisterium, but that has never been done yet. But it could happen, as you'll see here in a second. It can't resolve them or issue decrees about them unless, in certain cases, the Pope has endowed it with deliberative power. So if the Pope gives them the authority to do that, they could act on his behalf in his magisterium, kind of in the way that a dicastery, the congregation or dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, can act on behalf of the Pope. Similar to that, the Pope could endow a synod with this kind of authoritative ability, yet no Pope to date has done that. And these kinds of synods, by the way, are relatively new. Pope Paul VI was the first person to come up with these kinds of synodal advisory bodies. And it says, in which case he ratifies the decisions of the synod. So if he endows it with authority, he has to ratify its decisions ultimately. So it all comes back full circle to the authority of the Pope if it exercises any authority. This time around, it does not appear it's going to exercise any kind of actual authority. It's just merely an advisory body. There's been no hint that it is going to be given the ability to exercise magisterial authority. In fact, the Instrumentum Laboris, the working document that the bishops, Synod of Bishops, have issued so far, explicitly states that it is not magisterial. Okay, so it then notes that the Synod of Bishops is directly subject to the authority of the Roman Pontiff, who convokes a synod as often as it seems opportune to him. The Pope can convoke a synod as often as he wants because it's an advisory body, and he can ask for counsel and advice as often as he wants. And he can really invite anybody that he wants there. You know, the question is, I mean, can the Pope choose his own advisors? Of course he can. Is he limited to who they are? Of course not. The Pope can ask for advice from anyone. Now, whether or not he should just ask advice from just anyone is a different question, but can he? Yeah, he can, which means he could ask for advice from anyone, even non-Catholics. Again, it's a different question of whether or not he should, but he certainly can. And it doesn't have to be limited to bishops. He can ask for advice from bishops, priests, monks, laity, anybody. The Pope can ask anyone for advice. There's no rules here. Jesus never said, St. Peter, you and your successors are limited to asking this particular group of people for advice. That just never happened. Didn't happen. Jesus gave the church the authority and gave it the ability to decide things like that for itself. So he convokes the synod as often as he wants, designates the place where its sessions are to be held, radios the election of members who must be elected according to the norm of special law, and designates and appoints other members, determines at an appropriate time before the celebration of a synod the contents of the question to be treated according to the norm of special law. He defines the agenda. This is right there in Canon Law. I see some people who are incredibly foolish and ignorant, but for some reason they think that they're in a position to comment on these things publicly. But I'll see them comment on the synod publicly, and they'll say the Pope is controlling the synod. The Pope is doing, and it's as if they think this is an ecumenical council or something. The Pope is doing this, and not aware that ecumenical councils have been controlled by emperors and all kinds of people before. Putting that to the side, it's as if they think this is somehow a council. The Pope is setting this up, and he's determining this agenda, and he's appointing this person, but not, and he's bringing this person, but not that one. It's not even a council. But they treat it as if that's what it is, and the Pope's manipulating it. How can you manipulate who your advisors are? There's no manipulation when you determine who your advisors are and how they're going to discuss the advice that they give to you. So there's a lot of foolishness in these discussions. There's a lot of ignorance from commentators, Catholic content creators who speak on this matter, and they'll speak along those lines, and you'll be seeing that in the coming weeks. He determines at an appropriate time the contents. He defines the agenda, presides at the synod personally or through others. He concludes, transfers, suspends, and dissolves the synod. I mean, he has 100% control over it because it's just an advisory body. This is not how an ecumenical council would function. It's not how a local council or a national council would function. But it is how the Synod of Bishops functions, not only canonically, but just by way of common sense. The Pope can kind of determine all these things whenever he is seeking counsel and advice from people. And of course, the Pope is above canon law, so he could change any of these canons at any moment if he wanted to. And in fact, Pope Francis has modified some of the canons in regards to the Synod of Bishops, just recently, in fact, within about a year. Okay, so there's that. I wanted to also briefly talk about what they are going to be discussing, which is expressed here in this article. There's kind of three big things that they want to outline. How can we be more fully a sign, an instrument of union with God and of the unity of all humanity? How can we be more united with God and the church as a sign of that unity with God, and of a unity with humanity? How can we bring that about more effectively? That's one thing they're discussing. How can we better share gifts and tasks in the service of the gospel? And what processes and structures and institutions are needed in a missionary synodal church? These processes and structures and institutions, they don't change the essential constitution of the church, despite what some of the fearmongers tell you. That's not the case. They are structures that are there for the well-being of the church, but not necessarily making changes to the actual being of the church, the actual essential constitution of the church. Jesus set up how the church is structured. He gave an outline. He gave a skeleton, if you will. And then he gave the church the authority to kind of flesh it out. So think of this, patriarchs. When did Jesus institute the role of patriarch? He didn't. That came later for the well-being of the church, but it's not essential to the being of the church. If you get rid of patriarchs tomorrow, that won't change anything essential to the church. When did Jesus create the College of Cardinals? He didn't. That came much later. It's there for the well-being of the church, but it's not part of the essential structure of the church. The church could get rid of all cardinals tomorrow, get rid of the College of Cardinals, and it won't change anything with the essential structure of the church. Now, it certainly might impact the well-being of the church, but it won't impact the being of the church. So this is important to keep in mind when it speaks of processes, structures, institutions. You know, what are processes and institutions that we could use to better be a missionary church? That's not changing the structure of the church as so many people would have you believe. It's rather asking, how can we better facilitate that mission? It's a fair question. Nothing wrong with it in and of itself. But I suppose by way of some criticism here, some constructive criticism, when it comes to the Synod on synodality, I kind of feel like the Pope could, save a lot of time here if he just kind of listened to a few people who would be able to tell him very quickly and easily how we could be a little bit more effective as a missionary church, how we could better share gifts and tasks in the service of the gospel. I think there are some ways to find out that advice without having to go through this long 2-year process of the Synod of Bishops. I mean, I can save the Pope some time right now. This second, I'll do it right now. You want to know how to be a better missionary church, how to better share gifts and tasks of the church? I would recommend 4 things. I would recommend that the Pope and the bishops need to pay attention to what is going on better, because I unfortunately have to conclude that the Pope and the bishops are relatively not very aware of what all is going on with the average Catholic, with the battles that are being fought by the average Catholic, and also what's really going on in the world and the issues that really need to be addressed there. To one degree or another, they have some level of awareness, but I've seen enough evidence and I've documented enough evidence on this show to indicate that, or to demonstrate that, there needs to be more. There needs to be more awareness on part of the Pope and the bishops. So that's number one. Pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on. Number 2, speak up, say something. I can't tell you how discouraging it is to see how silent bishops are, and sometimes even the Pope is, on really important issues that need to be addressed that would help the average Catholic to carry out their missionary assignment in the church. It's incredibly discouraging. Now, again, you can't speak about that which you don't know. I understand the bishops are very occupied. The Pope is very occupied. I get that. A lot of bishops are very preoccupied with dealing with the sex abuse crisis in their own diocese and closures of churches as a result of it. They're really preoccupied with dealing with administrative issues. I understand that. But ultimately, the role of a shepherd isn't to just deal with administrative issues, but it's to deal with salvation of souls, the needs of the faithful, stuff like that. So speak up. There's so many times where there are issues that are going on, and the only ones that speak up about it are laity. Sometimes the Pope might not speak up about something that's really important, or the bishops might not speak up. It's left to the laity to shoulder a lot of this stuff and to speak out against it, to correct error, to speak the truth, to strengthen the brethren. That should ultimately be the role of the Pope and the bishops, but so many times it is laity who have to do that. And that's unfortunate. That's not fair to the laity to have to shoulder that kind of burden. This is where the bishops need to be speaking up. So speak up. Number 3, speak clearly. Gosh, I can't tell you how many times you sometimes listen to the bishops and unfortunately sometimes the Pope, and it's just not clear what they're saying. I almost feel like it's like they have to go to a school to speak unclearly because they all tend to speak the same way in a very obscure way. And I just think this just isn't natural. Where did this come from? Was this taught in seminary? This kind of obfuscation that we sometimes see from the episcopate, it's almost as if, since so many of them do it, it's as if it's a feature that they're taught or something. Well, it's not helpful. It's not productive. Speak clearly. Speak and speak clearly. It's not very hard to do. And then number 4, discipline. Let's engage in some church discipline here. I'm not seeing a lot of it. And really, the situation in the church at this point has become so toxic because bishops aren't speaking up and addressing certain errors and disciplining certain voices in their own flock. It's become so toxic that it's unbearable. So, I mean, I could save the Pope and the bishops a whole lot of time. You don't have to do 2 years of synod on synodality. You don't really have to do that. It's very apparent and very obvious what needs to be done, and it's those 4 things. I don't know if that message will ever get to anyone in the episcopate, let alone the Pope, but at the very least, I offer it for our benefit. Now, I want to shift gears here. Well, actually, before I do that, let me show you one other thing. Another problem here with the synod. So, before I show you what I'm about to pull up on the screen, some people are concerned by the presence of priests, monks, even laity among the Synod of Bishops. Well, it's an advisory body, so it really doesn't have to be limited to bishops. Anybody could be there. The Pope could choose anyone. Now, I will say, if the majority isn't going to be bishops, you might want to change the name, because it doesn't make sense to keep calling it a Synod of Bishops when it's not really a synod, and it's not really made up of bishops entirely, at least. You might just want to change the name, as I've often suggested. Maybe just call it an advisory assembly. I don't know. Just come up with a different name. Well, because some people don't know what a Synod of Bishops is. They don't know what a synod is. They don't know that it could be made up of people other than bishops. They're confused. And here's a case where we see a priest being called on to participate with the Synod of Bishops. And yeah, in theory, there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with a priest being invited to the Synod of Bishops to offer advice. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But sometimes there could be some problematic priests where it is not wise to bring them along and ask for their advice. And some people are pointing this out, and rightly so. So here Strickland is saying, once again, the Synod looms as a planned attack on basic teachings of our beautiful Catholic faith. I don't agree with what he's saying as far as this is an attack on the faith and stuff like that. I think he has a lot of misunderstandings about it. But moving past that, he says, let us stand strong in the light of Christ and say no. And he puts 3 exclamation points. Okay. But he says Pope Francis personally invites pro-LGBT Father James Martin and Cardinal Supich to the October Synod. And then he references the Vigano news outlet, LifeSite News. Okay, so you have situations where Pope Francis, it says he personally invites. Well, in reality, he's the one who chooses everyone who comes, right? So it's all going to be a personal invitation in that sense. But is it wise to bring someone like Father James Martin along? Well, in reality, Pope Francis will also bring people on the very opposite extreme who are not liberal dissenters, but are radical traditionalist dissenters. He also invites them sometimes. So it seems that Pope Francis makes this decision on both ends of the spectrum. And what is likely the reason behind it is, in his mind, he thinks if you bring people from two ends of the spectrum together, it can kind of help facilitate a more balanced, you know, um, offering of advice. When you get to hear this extreme and that extreme and everything in the middle, you kind of get a balanced take. In theory, that might be helpful. The problem is if the people on your extremes are made up of people who are holding to positions that are not Catholic and are not compatible with Catholicism, you don't get a fair, balanced take because the ends of the spectrum are actually out of bounds. So those two ends of the spectrum need to be within the bounds of Catholic theology. But if you're bringing advisors from both ends of the spectrum, who both ends do not hold to Catholic views and views that are compatible with Catholicism and views that are necessary to remain in full communion, you're not necessarily going to get the best take. This is where I think we could do better in not only selecting advisors, but engaging in church discipline. In reality, there are some people who are part of the synod who really should have been disciplined already. You even have the very one who Pope Francis has kind of appointed to be the main facilitator, who is questioning things that actually questions whether or not the cardinal is in full communion with the Catholic Church. I've actually done a whole video on this with Cardinal Holeric, and his questioning of the question of women's ordination. And as Ratzinger, in the commentary on the Profession of Faith notes, you question those things, like those secondary objects of infallibility, that could impair your communion with the Catholic Church. So whenever you have somebody whose communion with the Catholic Church is questionable, and they're the ones facilitating this, that's not very productive, and it's certainly not a good look. Ultimately, is it going to amount to a whole lot? Probably not, because it's just an advisory body. And if you believe the promises of the Catholic Church that the magisterium won't defect, well, you could have a synod of bishops made up of nothing but atheists, and still that won't impact the teachings of the church, because the magisterium is not going to be impacted by the synod of bishops. But is it not helpful? Is it not productive? Is it really bad look? Does it send the wrong message? Yeah. And so this is where I think it could be done better. So I'm not very excited about this synod of bishops, because I kind of feel like it's not even necessary. You could just kind of cut to the chase and already know what needs to be done to be a better missionary church. And some of the people who are present there might not be the best people to ask for advice. In the case of Father James Martin, as I've read online, he is not going to be advising any of the doctrinal commissions at the council, for whatever that's worth. But it still sends the wrong message. All right, let's shift gears here. Before we do that, though, I want to remind you, hit that subscribe button. If you just now joined in, glad to have you. Thanks for joining. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and let's continue to the next topic here. Uh, this one is really going to turn your stomach. I mean, it's just, but we need to talk about it. Late term abortion and calling a late term abortion facility and hearing what they have to say about the subject, it will make your blood boil. It's absolutely disgusting to hear how flippant they are about the subject, but you need to hear it because you need to face reality and what is going on right now in the world. I'm going to play this for you. I don't recall any profanity in it. There's no profanity, but it's certainly not a topic for children. So might not want to have them around. Um, so let me address this. Jen says, respectfully disagree, Michael. Haven't dissenting viewpoints is how you learn about things outside your bubble. Otherwise, it's just a dressed up echo chamber. Totally fine to have people outside of your viewpoint. It's a different matter to have people presenting themselves as in full communion with the Catholic Church who are not in full communion with Catholic Church and seeking their advice under the guise that they are somehow in full communion with the Catholic Church. That's the problem. If you want to seek advice from people who are non-Catholics, that's fine. But don't go to somebody who professes to be Catholic but holds to non-Catholic perspectives to receive advice, Catholic advice. That's the problem. That's what I'm saying. So I don't know if you were really following it. So yeah, I think I'd have to disagree with you there. Okay, well, let's talk about this situation with the call here with the late term abortion facility. Again, may not want to have kids around for it just because of the subject matter. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen and let's talk about it. Gosh, it's hard to listen to this. It's not very long, but it's rough.
Where in America is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion? That is not happening. It's insulting.
The Care Clinic in Bethesda, Maryland.
Thank you for calling, Jen. How can I help you?
I am looking to have an abortion.
How far along are you?
I'm 34 right now. I am in a pretty desperate situation. My boyfriend is kind of out of the picture now, so I don't really have any support.
An abortion at any stage is actually much safer than delivering a term pregnancy. It's a 4 to 5 day procedure. We do some basic lab work on you and start to dilate your cervix. After that, we do what we call the fetal injection. A needle is inserted through the abdomen and into the fetal heart where lidocaine is injected, and that will completely numb the fetus so there's no pain. And then after that, we inject a medication called digoxin and another medication called KCL into the fetal heart, which will slow and then stop the fetal heartbeat. And then on that 4th day, depending on how your cervix is dilated.
Listen to the terms they're using, euphemisms. Medication. No, you mean poison. Medication. Shouldn't medicate somehow help you medically? It shouldn't result in the murder of an innocent human being if it's medication. You see the language that they're using?
Will break your water, and then we'll give you a medication called misoprostol. Misoprostol will sort of induce contraction and increase the dilation of your cervix. You're going to have contractions and cramping, and then we'll assist you in sort of pushing in the induction and then remove all of the products of conception. You're definitely going to feel discomfort and cramping and a lot of pressure, but we do give you fentanyl and Versed during the procedure. We specialize in later trimester care. Our doctor is very well versed in what he's doing, and he's very good.
Very well versed in this? So it's pretty common, right?
So I'm not like a rare situation. Y'all help women this late in pregnancy all the time?
All the time.
No.
All the time.
Where in America is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion? That is not happening. It's insulting.
The Care Clinic in Bethesda, Maryland.
Wow. I mean, does anything really need to be said here? I think we obviously know this is wrong. This is murder. But I have to say, we've noticed that our nation is becoming more and more corrupt. There are more and more problems in society We're spiraling more and more and more out of control. That is a sign we are under the wrath of God as a nation. I'm not talking about individuals, but I'm talking about as a nation, we are under the wrath of God. We're not in his favor. We're under his wrath. And as long as this evil continues to infect this nation, we will continue to remain under the wrath of God. This is disgustingly evil. It's hard to just sit here and even listen to that. And yet the lady on the other end of that phone, she can have this conversation so casually, and she can talk about it as if it's no big deal. You're just going to get your arm checked. You know, you feel a little pain there in your elbow, and we're going to take a look at your elbow, and we're going to give you some medication to alleviate the pain. That's how they're talking about it. But in reality, we're talking about a late-term abortion, murder. It's evil. It's disgusting. It's wrong. And then you have political candidates who cover up this evil, pretend that it's not going on, and then gaslight people on a national stage in a debate and try to say, oh, it's even insulting to pretend that this is going on. That's the definition of gaslighting, what you just saw there. That's disgustingly evil. And we have to repent of this. And if we don't, I honestly think this nation is going to continue to experience the wrath of God more and more and more. This is wild stuff. I couldn't believe what I heard when I saw that. Well, enough said about that. Let's move on. If you're just now joining in, hey, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you find this stream helpful. Let's talk about a brief statement that was released by Bishop Michael Olson from the Diocese of Fort Worth on the situation with the Carmelite nuns who defected from the communion with the Catholic Church and joined the Schismatic Society of St. Pius X. And of course, he has warned everybody, don't go there. This is in schism. You can't receive sacraments from them. He's warned his flock against that. He continues to do that here because in previous cases, we saw some of the priests that were administering sacraments for their convent were not in good standing with the Catholic Church. Surprise, surprise. Some of them have some credible accusations against them. We've seen that. Well, now there is a third priest who is administering sacraments there who does not appear to have any faculties to do so. And the bishop is warning people about it. And I, before we read it, I kind of have to just ask the question, how long is this going to go on before Bishop Olson, formally excommunicates these people? I mean, they've already been excommunicated as far as that automatic excommunication, but a declared excommunication so that all the faithful know they've been excommunicated. How much longer? Like, what is Bishop Olson waiting for? This goes back to what I was talking about earlier. You want to know what we need to do to be a better missionary church? How about we engage in some church discipline? People might take us seriously then. If we don't engage in church discipline, how is anyone going to take the faith seriously? Because if the bishops aren't taking it seriously, at least in their actions, by not disciplining people, why would other people take it seriously? My question is, why hasn't he formally excommunicated them? I don't get it. For some reason, he is incredibly patient, I think overly patient, and is still trying to give them an opportunity for reconciliation, which is wild at this point because it's just so clear we need to cut the cord. But let's take a look at what he says. I didn't think there was going to be any more statements released on the situation, but there are. September 24th, so yesterday, it has come to my attention that the Reverend Vincent Young, a priest of the Diocese of Scranton, may be in residence and offering Mass at the Arlington Carmel. Father Young is a priest of the Diocese of Scranton. He has no faculties in the Diocese of Scranton. and has been absent from the diocese for approximately 20 years. Wow, that ain't good. Been absent from a diocese for 20 years? Let me address this real quick from the chat. Josh says, bishops are afraid of schism, thus they don't administer discipline. The schism's already there. Surprise, surprise. They left the church and went to a schismatic society. It's already there. The point is, we just need to do something about it. Okay. So he has no faculties. Father Young has not informed me of his presence in the Diocese of Fort Worth. He has not requested faculties for the celebration of the sacraments or for my permission for ministry in the Diocese of Fort Worth. Does that sound like in Catholic communion to you? You don't have faculties from your bishop who you were incarnated under. You don't have faculties from the bishop that you're in whose diocese you're currently administering sacraments. Does that sound like full communion to you? Does that sound like Catholic communion? Or does that sound like schism? If you say that sounds like full Catholic communion to me, you need to work through the basics of ecclesiology because you've missed it. You've missed it. That's like a person saying, "Oh, well, you know what? You can be saved by works apart from grace." If that's how you think it works, well, you've embraced the heresy of Pelagianism, and you might want to work through the basics of soteriology because you've missed it. Well, same with ecclesiology. If you think, oh yeah, this is still fully Catholic, yeah, we need to go back to the drawing board at that point. We need to go back to basic catechesis. I'm just still shocked that anybody still defends this stuff and thinks that it's somehow not schismatic. Okay, finally, mindful of the salvation of souls, as your bishop, I must plead with you, the faithful of the Diocese of Fort Worth, that for the good of your souls, you do not participate in any sacraments that may be offered at the monastery, as such participation will associate you with the scandalous disobedience and disunity of the members of Arlington Carmel. He says that a little bit nicer this time. Last time he did use the word schism. Here it's implied, but he doesn't use the word. The same can be said of offering them any financial support at this time. Rather, I invite the faithful of the Diocese of Fort Worth to join me in prayer and sacrifice for the nuns, for the restoration of the order of the Arlington Carmel, and for the return of the sober obedience and regular union with the church by members of the community. Bishop Olson, with all due respect, that's not going to happen. That ship sailed over a year ago. I don't know why he still thinks that it's possible at this point in time to bring them back to reconciliation. If they will ever be reconciled, it will not be anytime soon, and it certainly won't be by pretending that this is somehow a situation that can be healed in the immediate future. I think what we need to do is go ahead, for the sake of all souls out there, cut the cord, excommunicate them so that people know very clearly how severe this is. If you don't do that, how will people know how severe this is? They're just going to think, well, it's not that big of a deal. What's the big deal? Now, if people see that there's a formal excommunication, well, that's going to raise some eyebrows. Kind of like in the case of Vigano. We already knew he was excommunicated, automatically excommunicated. The guy excommunicated himself. But the Vatican finally came out and did the right thing and formally excommunicated him. They declared it. They declared, at least, that he was automatically excommunicated. And they did that so that everybody is on the same page and they know that that happened. That needs to happen here. We already know these nuns are excommunicated, or at least if you understand ecclesiology, you already know that. But for the sake of many people who don't, it would be helpful to go ahead as the bishop and say these things. Cut the cord, say it. That way people know why to avoid this community and why we shouldn't go down this road in the future. So last bit here. I just came across this on Twitter. I thought it was interesting. I want to share my screen. There's so much stuff out there these days. You never know if it's true or if it's AI, if it's made up. You never know. For all I know, this is a fake video, but so far I haven't seen any community notes alerting me to this being a fake AI generated video or something like that. I thought it was worth commenting on if it's authentic. Some of y'all may have seen this. Evidently, this is some kind of deal where you can create your own Coca-Cola bottle or can and put whatever you want on there, whatever message you want on there. And this guy tries to put Jesus on there, and it won't let him do it. But he can put everything else on there. Allah, Buddha, you name it. But he can't put Jesus. It explicitly tells him, like, no, we've run into an error here. You can't put that there. Let's watch this together because I found it fascinating.
So at the Coke store, you can personalize a message. You can put Allah loves you. Or you could even put, let me see, let's just try it out. Buddha loves you.
All right, that's not how to spell Buddha, but that is the Urban Dictionary way of spelling a term that is synonymous with weed. But okay, we're not gonna harp on that too much though.
But you cannot even type in the word Jesus.
Well, I did let him type in Jesu, right? Isn't that how they say it in Italy? But you see, he tried to put in that last S, and it wouldn't let him. Wow. And so it says on the screen, sadly, we cannot automatically allow this text on the can. There's good news. If you feel this is a mistake, speak to the store representative. Why was this an alert, but not the others? And okay, maybe, I don't know, trying to think of the most favorable opinion here. Maybe they didn't want that on there because they didn't want anyone insulting Jesus. But if that were the case, then why were you able to type Buddha and Allah on there when you also not want people insulting that? So it is odd that it's isolated to Jesus, but not other names. Why is that? Is this another example of how there is discrimination against Christians in the States?
We cannot allow this text on the can. Everything else is good though. Even if I put, let's see, Satan.
Oh no, bro.
Hold on. Satan loves you. You could put that.
That's wild. How do you have an alert for the name Jesus but not Satan? How does that happen? So if you're that guy who says, okay, we're gonna screen certain phrases, profanity, certain names, how do you give a pass to Satan but not Jesus?
You could put Satan loves you, Allah loves you, Buddha loves you. But when you type in this word, you can't even type the word in. That's crazy. That's ridiculous.
That's pretty wild. Now, I've never seen one of these things before. Okay, this is the first time I've seen this on a video. Never encountered this in person. I don't know. For all I know, this is fake, but it doesn't appear to be. Seems real to me. Seems authentic. That is sad. More depravity from this nation. More, perhaps, discrimination and targeting of Christians, but not being consistent with other religions and saying, well, okay, we're not going to have anything religious. It's just specific targeting of Christians. It would be one thing to say, okay, we're not going to have anything at all religious, just to be fair, which I think would be stupid, but okay, at least we're being consistent at that point. But you can't target certain religions and then give a pass to others and not expect for people to call this out. That's really messed up from Coca-Cola. But I guess we all kind of expected that from Coca-Cola. Anyways, hope y'all enjoyed the show. Everybody hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. If you want to support what I'm doing here with the channel, great way to do it is patreon.com/Reason of Theology. If you visit that link at Patreon, you'll get plenty of extra content for your patrons only. and you'll enable me to continue to do what I'm doing here. All right. We'll see you later. God bless.